It's such a blessing to be here with you all tonight on Wednesday night. And I know especially a big blessing right now because of the way the weather's going. Just, like all of y'all be safe out there driving, or whoever you're riding with, just to make sure the person that's driving is paying attention on the road. They get real dangerous at this point in time. I know it's crazy, but yeah, it gets real dangerous at this point in time right now, and it gets crazy out there. So just be careful. But such a huge blessing again to be here on Wednesday nights with you all, and I really enjoy these times. And tonight we're going to continue the series that we've been going into, and we're going to continue to dive even further and further down into this area. So we're talking about our series, Increase Our Faith. We take this from the book of Luke, and we take it where the disciples have said, Lord, increase our faith. And we've looked at several different things from different parts of the Bible that talk about faith, including where we're at right now with Hebrews chapter 11, the faith chapter. And we've looked at several different aspects of how to increase our faith. And now tonight, I titled this one a little different. It's a little more different than what I'm used to, but I think this one had a really good way of speaking. It spoke to me really, really well, and I hope it speaks to you all really well tonight as well, that you get something out of this message tonight, and it's titled, Faith to be a Stranger. Faith to be a stranger. Last week we talked about Noah and the faith to be prepared for the flood. We talked a little bit about what it means to be prepared and how to take action. Verse number 6 in Hebrews chapter 11 says, but it's impossible to please God without faith. You must believe who he says he is, and you must be a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. You need to believe on that. I talked a little bit about showing how Noah set that example for those that take faith into action. And now we're talking about somebody else who's a pretty important character in the Bible, Abraham. We're talking a little bit about Abraham tonight. We're reading from several different parts of the Bible really quick. We're going to start with Hebrews 11, and then we're going to move to Genesis really quick. But we're going to start with Hebrews chapter 11, verses number 8 through 10. So in verse number 8, it says, by faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. Verse 9, by faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. And verse 10 says, for he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. If we move over into Genesis chapter 12, this is where you hear the story of Abraham. And we're going to start with verses number 1 through 5. And then we're going to move into verses, we're actually going to go to, we'll stay there in just Genesis chapter 12, 1 through 5. And it says here in verse number 1, now the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and I will curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So Abram departed, as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all of the substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. So we're looking at Abraham really quick, and we're talking a little bit about what happened in Genesis chapter 12 right there, how God had called him out at the age of 75, told him, I'm going to take you from where you're used to being right now. I'm going to take you somewhere completely different. I'm not going to tell you where it's at. I'm not going to give you the name of it. I'm not going to tell you much details, just that I want you to go. Just that I want you to I'm going to tell you where to go, and you go. And so Abraham did it. Abraham left. And now he's mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11 of having faith. And I think it's really important because as I was looking through this, as I was dissecting this a little bit more and more, I really saw the emphasis of him being called a stranger. And a lot of these commentaries that I was reading and a lot of these studies that I was looking at, it says that he was a stranger in this land. Although he called it his home, although God had given him a new home and had promised him land beyond land and promised him to have generation after generation, more than even the stars are numbered in the skies, he had told him, but he felt like a stranger in his own land. And why? What does that tell us about him and his faith? Let me ask this question real quick, and if you guys can raise your hand. I know we don't have a lot of people here, but who here went to public school? Who here's not homeschooled? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, now out of all those people that raised their hand, I'm not talking to the homeschoolers right now. You all need to hold up real quick, but I'm talking to the people that went to public school. How many of y'all had to change schools? You were at a school at some point, and then midway at some point you had to go somewhere different. Did anyone here have to go through that? No. Okay, so we have examples of that where I don't know about you guys, I didn't have to go through that, but I knew several people I became friends with that when they came to the school that I was going to, It was such a different way for them to have lived. As a matter of fact, I actually had one friend that came from Mexico at the age of 12, 11 or 12. Came from Mexico, and he was brand new to the States, and he was brand new to the area, and he was trying to learn so much, and he was trying to take in so much. But he told me one time, a couple of years later, after we became friends, over that time period, he had told me it was the strangest thing to be here because I was learning something completely different than I was used to. He was from Monterrey, and he came all the way up this way to the States, and he said it was just something completely different. And he says, it took me a couple of years, and I'm still trying to get used to this whole environment. Further down the line, when we got more into high school, he was completely now loved it here. He, really wanted to just, take part in everything that the school was doing. He had so much spirit, and he just really changed from that person that I met the first time to the person that I met later on. The point I'm getting at is, I don't know about you guys, but I don't like to be somebody caught up in awkward situations. I don't know if anyone here likes to be caught up in awkward situations. I don't like to be caught up in awkward moments, like you move from one school to the next and you're kind of like the new kid. Yeah. Or if you're like in a conversation that you really don't feel like you belong into at a certain point in time, and you're just trying to figure out what to do with that conversation, and you're just trying to figure out what in the world am I doing here, and you find the escape, like, oh, look, let me check this on my phone, and let me get out of here real quick, or, oh, like, look, so-and-so, look, I'll be right back, God bless you all, I'll be back in a little bit, and you just start doing all these things to kind of, it's like, okay, I'm going to side my way out of this conversation, but sometimes there's no exit, and you're kind of just stuck there for a moment, and sometimes you're kind of like, what am I supposed to do here when I feel like I have nothing really in this conversation going on? And it's not a rude thing, it's just more of like maybe there's someone that just jumped in and you're kind of like, okay, this conversation is going somewhere, but like it doesn't really pertain to me, it's a different topic, I know nothing about, how can I talk about something that I don't know anything about? Those things happen. It feels really, really weird to be some type of awkward stranger. It feels really weird to be some type of, like in an awkward moment. I don't like those moments, and if you do, you can go on with your life how you want to, but I don't like them. I try to avoid them, but sometimes they're unavoidable. The same thing goes for our life with God. Sometimes God calls us to go into some really awkward, strange situations. He calls us into these things that we feel a little bit more like uneasy about, but that's what happened with Abraham. He was 75 years old when he was called out of his home. I don't know about you all, but by the time I get to 75, I can imagine God telling me to move from where I'm at. Let's say I lived there all my life. I'm there for the entire majority of my life, only to find myself being told, no, you got to move somewhere completely different. But where? And God says, no, I'll tell you in a little bit, but just get your stuff and go first. Where do I go? Just go. What do you mean just go? You're going to see in just a moment. See, I think faith to be a stranger means something completely on than what we're thinking about. And I'm going to give us 5 things tonight. 2 of them are going to be about what it doesn't mean to be a stranger. And the last 3 will be about what it means to be a stranger. So we don't want to get confused as to what it means to be a stranger. We want to actually dissect this a little bit more. So we're going to look at 2 things that what it doesn't mean and 3 things as to what it does mean. All right? And look at this whole thing about how we can learn to increase our faith based on Abraham's story. So my first point for tonight is to be a stranger doesn't mean you're lost. To be a stranger doesn't mean that you're somewhere that you're lost on. I've gone many, many times driving around, or like I've been many times, I think, where you're trying to figure out where you're going, but you're kind of lost. If it wasn't for Apple CarPlay, if it was not for Google Maps, if it wasn't for my Apple Maps, I sometimes would not know where I'm going, and I'll be completely honest. And there'll be a generation that might mock you for that, because I'll tell you, back in their day, you had no maps, you had nothing but just go and get lost. I actually had the conversation with my father-in-law the other day on Monday when I told him, so when you came and worked all the way over here, did you know where to go to? And they're like, no, they just told you the road and you went. And you had to go find out where it was at. And I'm like, that's, I have my phone now. I don't know what I would do if I'm trying to find a place that I'm not too familiar with, and I don't know which way to go to. You feel lost at that point in time. But that's not what we're talking about here. It doesn't mean that to be a stranger doesn't mean that you're lost. See, Abraham was called to go. Was called to just leave. Abraham was called to pack everything up, bring your family, bring everyone that's coming with you, and you're going to leave the land that you know. You're going to leave the land of your fathers before. You're going to leave what you're familiar with, and you're going to go into uncharted territory that you have never been familiar with before. Abraham did not step into the new land and go, oh, wait, I've been here before. When I was a kid, like years back, they brought me on a field trip out here when I was in school. No, it was something completely different that he was not used to. God told him, you're going to go from where you know to where you don't know. But I think the amazing thing behind hearing that story about Abraham and everything that he goes through this journey When you're looking at Genesis 12 and you're looking at Genesis 13 and so on and so forth, as you hear this journey that he's taking, nowhere does it say that Abraham got lost. Nowhere does it say that Abraham was kind of like, okay, wait, I don't know what's going on here. No, the entire time God was guiding him and taking him step by step. See, I think the most amazing thing about hearing someone like Abraham is he heard one thing and one thing only, just go. He took one step that God gave him, and he was able to go from there and put faith in God and say, I don't know where he's leading me to, I don't know where I'm going to, but I'm going to go. I think throughout the Bible, you're going to kind of hear Jesus, and you're going to kind of hear God kind of give instructions to like Noah, and he tells him, no, I'm going to have you build an ark. You're going to build it this big. It's going to be this wide. You're going to do this because there's a flood coming. And he gave him the whole outline of what it was looking like. He told Noah, here's everything, the blueprints and everything that's going to happen in 120 years. We got to work now. But for Abraham, he told him, no, I'm going to give you one thing. Just go. And Abraham was left with no other answer but just, I need you to leave. Sometimes God works us through us that way, and I don't know about you all again, but I don't really work that well, I think, when just being told one thing and one thing only. If they had just told me, just do this one thing, but you're kind of looking for a plan. You're kind of looking for an outline. You're kind of looking for what is the schedule we have for the day. My wife and I talk about this almost every morning when we're off from work. What is the plan for today? And sometimes I upset her a little bit by telling her, I don't know, let's just see where it takes us. And she's like, no, because what's going to happen at this point and at that point? And she's kind of looking at me like, you got to have a plan for the day. And I'm like, okay, well, let's sit down and talk about it. And we sit down and we discuss it, and we start to realize, oh, there's a lot more going on here than what I realized. There's a lot more here that we need to do than what I had remembered. And if I had just winged it, I might have been like caught up in, oh, wait, I scheduled myself to do 3 different things that I shouldn't have. You got to have a plan. But for Abraham, that wasn't the case. For Abraham, he didn't get to sit there and go, God, what's the roadmap look? Where's this going to take us? What does the road look like? What does the weather look like? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be, a little bit different? Rainy? Is it cold? Is it hot? I don't know. What are we going to find with? No, he was just told to go. But I really want to emphasize the fact that to be a stranger doesn't mean that you're lost. If you look at how God had taken care of Abraham, every single step that he had told him to do, it was one step at a time, but he took care of him. Sometimes I think we get a little confused. We think that just because we're a stranger, we're trying to figure this thing out in life and we're trying to navigate through our own self. Just because, God is guiding us somewhere, he calls us somewhere, we start to say, well, now God has got me lost on this path. No, it just means you might be a little off track. Sometimes we get thrown off track on our journey. Sometimes we get a little thrown off track in our everyday life. Sometimes you have something planned for one day and it comes out to be something totally, completely different. Sometimes you're planning to do one thing and then something just throws you way off, but that doesn't mean you're lost. When God calls you to do something, when he calls you to find something, when he wants you, when he wants to use you, and you're like, okay, Lord, yes, I'm going to trust you and I'm going to try this. And the first step you take, you feel like you're completely lost. Take a step back and think, oh, hold on. Where am I at right now? And I need to trust God with what's going on here. Sometimes he will give you the whole plan, and sometimes he won't. Sometimes you're going to see it like Noah's situation. Sometimes you'll see it like Abraham's situation, the whole outline or nothing at all. But I want us to remember something like in Psalms 23. If you go to Psalms 23 really quick, that really, really famous psalm, we know where we're going with this one here. Psalms 23 in verses 2 and 3 says, in verses 2 and 3, yes. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Key word there is leadeth. And then he says, he restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. I've done a study on this a couple months ago. We had dissected a little bit of Psalms 23. And I really, really, really like the fact that it says here in verses 2 and 3, he says, leadeth twice. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness. He leadeth me beside still waters. In this whole situation going on for David and what he's talking about, no matter what's going on in David's life, he says God leads him. He's leading me everywhere I go. So just because you're being called by God, just because God is telling you, I want you to do this for me, I want you to try this for me, I feel like God is calling me to do this and move into this direction. And it could be anything you might be doing in life. You might be trying to search for another job. You might be trying to figure out, what is my major in college? What do I want to do? What am I really, really trying to pursue here? What am I looking for? You might have all that figured out, and in another moment you feel something tugging at you, telling you, no, try this different. Or you might be trying to figure out your relationship with somebody or friendships with other people. Think, is this the right person I need to be talking to? Are these the right people I should be going out with? Am I putting myself in the right situations? And anything that we do, know the fact that when God is calling you, you're not lost. Off track sometimes, but never lost. stranger, to have that faith like Abraham did as a stranger, doesn't mean you're lost. So let's make sure we understand that as we continue on. The first thing I want us to realize, when you're a stranger, when you're living for God, when you're being called by God the way Abraham was, for whatever may be in your life and in whatever situation you're in right now, it doesn't mean you're lost. Second point for tonight, to be a stranger doesn't mean you're alone. To be a stranger doesn't mean you're alone. I think another misconception that we have about being a stranger is that the perception that when you're a stranger, you're alone. I knew a lot of people in school that when they moved schools or when they felt like they didn't have friends, they felt like they were alone, they felt like they were different, they felt like they didn't belong. And only to have a conversation with those people only led me to realize the fact that no, it's just the fact that you just haven't had the right conversation with the right people. You haven't had the right conversation at the right time with the right people. Only to find that these are great people to be around. These are great people to have a conversation with. And all because we think that when you're a stranger, when you're someone in an awkward situation, when you're thrown off where you feel so comfortable, you feel like you're alone. And I want to really emphasize something that we say is a little bit like a cliche. It's a little bit, cheesy at times. But it's true. You're not alone. God is with you in every single moment that you take on this earth. God is with you. When you're a Christian, when you're a born-again Christian, when you're saved by Jesus Christ, when you've confessed your sins and you want to ask Christ into your heart, and you become a Christian, God is with you from that moment on, and He will be with you until you step foot off this earth. So you're never going to be alone. To be a stranger does not mean you're alone. I think sometimes we confuse a little bit of being alone for just God being a little bit silent at the time. Being a little bit more quiet at the time. Not that He's disappeared from us. Like we learned last week in Genesis chapter 8 in the first verse, it tells us in the first part, and God remembered Noah. Noah did not see God go quiet. Noah did not see God disappear. But Noah had saw that God had just remained for a moment, trying to figure out what's going on here. God was taking care of everything that He needed to do at that point in time, and He remembered Noah. And as we talked about last night, God remembers who you are. As a matter of fact, I heard this from a message the other day, and I forgot what verse it was, but I was listening to, actually I think it was this morning, as I'm not mistaken, from a sermon that I heard from this past, from yesterday. It said that, God has you engraved, in His hands. The same thing here. You're not alone. He has you right there with Him. And so as Abraham was called to go out and to be a stranger, as Abraham was called to go out there and take on this new thing, God had promised him at this point, I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to guide you in every single way that I can. And I think Abraham was getting a bit more, in Genesis 15, you're going to see Abraham a little bit more, well, I need to see something happening here, Lord, because as I'm moving into this, what am I looking for? You told me that I would have generations. You told me this land would be mine. What am I promised? What is something that I'm going to get from this? Because I think it's reasonable for us to sometimes ask God, what are we looking in the end, Lord? Like, what am I going towards? What are you taking me to? And Abraham had told him in Genesis 15:5, we can go to Genesis 15:5 real quick. And he brought him forth abroad and said, look now toward heaven and tell the stars if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, so shall thy seed be. And verse 6 says, and he believed in the Lord, and He counted it to him for righteousness. I think that's such a beautiful thing, because when God had told him, I promise you, just as many stars that you see in the sky in the heavens, so will your generations be, so will the children that come after you, and they'll keep going, and they'll keep going, and you're going to see this, and I'm going to promise you this blessing. And immediately after, it says that Abraham believed Him. Abraham believed what he had said, and he knew God was being righteous at that time. He could trust God's righteousness at that point in time. I think sometimes for us, maybe we're looking at different things about what it means to be alone. Maybe we're looking at different situations in our life where when God calls us, sometimes we feel like, well, so-and-so doesn't want to follow me. Maybe your significant other feels like, this is something completely different. I don't know what you're looking for, but this is not where you want to go. Or friends are telling you, no, what do you mean you're going to get more involved with this? Or what do you mean God's asking you to do this? I think you should step back from that and take a little bit more of a self-reflection time, meditate a little bit more on these things. And they want you to focus on yourself more than what God has asked you to do. Or family might even try to tell you the same thing. And they might try to convince you, no, we're a lot more important than what's going on in, as far as what you're thinking about God is calling you to. And family is important, and I do believe in what Brother Ellison had told us the other day on Sunday, telling us the fact that you need to take care of your family, and you need to put family first, and you need to be able to, in order to do God's will, you have to be with your family. But I also do believe that family should be supportive in whatever God's calling you to do, and being able to support you and pray for you in that way. Sometimes we feel alone when we don't have people backing us up. Sometimes we feel alone when all these things are just ganging up on us and we're thinking, am I the only one taking this road? Am I the only one taking this path? Am I the only stranger down this road? But I want to give us a couple of verses tonight to assure the fact that to be a stranger doesn't mean you're alone. Joshua 1:9. I have 3 verses for tonight. Joshua 1:9 really quick. Oh, let me pull that out real quick. Sorry, my iPad crashed on me real quick. There it is. Joshua 1:9 says, there it is, it's loading, it's coming. Oh, have I not commanded thee? Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be dismayed. For the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest. And in that point in time, I really like the end of it because it says, for the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest. Wherever you go, God is going with you. Deuteronomy 31:6. Deuteronomy 31:6 says, be strong and of good courage. Fear not, nor be afraid of them. For the Lord thy God, he it is that doth go with thee, and he will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Again, he goes with you wherever you're going in that point in time. And the last verse I have for us, Matthew 28:20. Matthew 28:20 says, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Amen. In those verses that I gave you right there in Joshua 1:9 and Deuteronomy 31:6 and Matthew 28:20, they all have something in common. God says, wherever you're going, I'm going with you. Wherever I'm calling you to go, I'm going to be there with you. Don't worry. He'll never call you to go somewhere where he's not going to be at. He's not going to be like that one friend that tries to betray you and tell you, when you want to go check that out for me and tell me if it's safe or not. One of those people that tries to tell you, go real quick first, you see if it's safe, and then I'll follow right behind you because, I selected you to go first. Sometimes that happens with people that we know, but God is not that type of God to lead us somewhere where he doesn't think it's safe, where he doesn't think that that's where you should be going to. He's going to call you where he wants you to go to because he knows he is right there in the midst with you. And I think that's something that we really have to really focus on in our lives, is the fact that the safest place for you to be is where God is. The safest place for you to be is where God is calling you to be. You may feel like this is a crazy path that you're taking. This is a place that you're unfamiliar with. But don't worry. If God is calling you there, trust me, that is exactly where you need to be. So to recap our first two, to be a stranger doesn't mean that you're lost. And to be a stranger doesn't mean that you're alone. Now we're going to focus on the last three. The last three that tells us what does it mean to be a stranger? What does it mean to be a stranger in this time? Point number 3, to be a stranger means to be uncomfortable. At times we need to get a little uncomfortable. And what I mean by being uncomfortable is moving out of the comfort zone that we get so used to and being able to take that challenge on for God. Maybe take up something different. Maybe do something a little different. I want us to realize that as we navigate through life, as we start to push through this journey that we're taking, as we try to go from being, that child to now being a teenager, and from teenager into that young adulthood, and from young adulthood into getting to now your area of expertise into a career and trying to establish yourself out there, sometimes we have to take that step that's a little uncomfortable. I can tell you that when I was at my previous job, I got really comfortable there to the point to where I told myself, I think this is a little too much for me, in the sense of I'm getting too comfortable here. I need to challenge myself with something a little different. And then when I got into the new job that I am currently at right now, when I first started there, I can tell you it was a completely different type of career. And I was completely uncomfortable at times, in the sense of, I got to figure out what's going on here. I got to figure out how to do this. I got to start getting on the ball with this, only to find myself a couple years down the road a lot more comfortable where I'm at right now. But that doesn't happen without you getting uncomfortable first. That doesn't happen without you having to take on that challenge first. And I think God really calls us in that way at times. He wants us to be uncomfortable because he wants us to fully rely on him, not to rely on what we know. If I stayed at the job I was at before, I would have probably been really relying on everything I know and everything I've done. And it just becomes such secondhand nature. And I just continue to do this. But I really wouldn't feel too great about myself and the career I was going into. When I took the change that I took, I'm a lot more happy with where I'm at right now and seeing the challenges that I still face every single year. And being able to challenge myself every single year and being able to tell myself, I'm learning something new every single time. And I think we need to challenge ourselves like that as Christians, because sometimes we get really used to just the we take with the Bible. Our 15-minute devotional time, or the 30 minutes, or the hour, or sometimes we get so used to not doing that time at all whatsoever, but we get used to just doing Sundays and Wednesdays. We get used to just being so comfortable in our little prayers that we give every so often, and maybe in the morning, in the middle of the day, and in the evening, or when we get here together on a Wednesday night, we pray a little bit more than usual, and then we go on with Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Monday, Tuesday, and we just live a normal, average, everyday Christian life. But I want to say that if you want to take on that challenge for God, if you want God to call you, if you want to see his blessings, if you want to increase your faith, you have to be uncomfortable at times, because he's going to call you to do something completely different. One thing I wrote down here, I think sometimes we confuse a little bit of this thing called comfort and peace. I think that we really find that God tries to tell us, he doesn't tell us we're going to have comfort a lot. I think we get those two confused, because to me, peace and comfort aren't the same thing. In John 16:33, I think this is the perfect example as to what he tells us. In John 16:33, if you go there really quick, we'll look at that verse. In verse number 33, he says, "These things have I spoken unto you, that in me you might have comfort." No, he says, that you might have peace. In this world you shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. I don't find the word comfort there. I don't see him telling his disciples, don't worry, on this journey that you're taking with me, on this path that I'm taking you down, you will be comfortable in the most high palaces. You're going to be in the nicest buildings. You're going to be able to preach in air conditioning. And the disciples are wondering, air conditioning? What are you talking about? Don't worry, I'll give you that luxury just for you right now during this time. No, he doesn't tell them, you're going to have comfort. He says, no, you'll have peace. And I think peace is a lot different than comfort. They're not the same thing. As Christians, we get a little confused at times as, Lord, I'm looking for that comfort. I'm looking for you to give me comfort. And yes, while God does give us comfort in our lives, but I think that what we're mistaking that for is peace. He gives us peace knowing the fact that while we will have tribulations, while there are going to be hard times in our lives, while things are going to get so difficult to the point to where we just drop down on our knees and we have to ask God to really just pick us back up, during those times, he gives you peace, not comfort. Those are two different things, and I want to emphasize that, because to be a stranger, I strongly believe, means to be uncomfortable in certain situations, in certain places where you're not used to, that you have to challenge yourself to go into. Because I think if we want to have faith to be a stranger, we need to realize that it's okay to be uncomfortable not knowing what God's plan is, but having peace in knowing that he will guide you through that entire time. Being able to know that you might be uncomfortable and not knowing what the plan is. He's given you a plan, but you don't have the full plan. But having peace knowing that he's going to be with you every single step of the way. And Abraham, I do believe, exemplifies that type of behavior. Not having comfort in the trip that he took, but having peace in knowing the God that he can trust is the God that he can really rely on every single step of the way. So the first thing that we're talking about tonight as to what it means to be a stranger is to be uncomfortable. Challenge yourselves, push yourselves, take on that challenge that God wants you to take on in your life, whatever that may be, whatever he may be calling you to do. Be ready that when he does, it sometimes might be just a little uncomfortable. But don't worry, he's with you through that entire time. My fourth point for tonight, to be a stranger means nothing is permanent. Abraham was called out of his home after 75 years of living here on this earth. And I'm really thinking to myself, after 75 years, can you imagine moving? So imagine being 75 years old and having to be told, now you're going to go somewhere completely different, something completely changing in your life. It means to me that when I see that God had called him in his later age, it just means that even as you get older, nothing is permanent. Just because you get used to a routine, just because you get used to certain things that you get so comfortable around, doesn't mean that that's going to stay permanently here. You ever feel like there's times where things can stay really consistent and you see your life going really well, and that's fine. God's given you that blessing, and we all have those blessings at times where we're going to have such smooth roads ahead of us in our life. Things are going great, things are going fine, things are going amazing. And I'm sure at this age that we're all at already, we realize the fact that when those things happen, at some point in time, there's a little bump in the road that just throws you off. Bam! You get that text message, you get that phone call, you get something that just disturbs you in the most random way possible. Why? Because nothing's permanent on this side of the world. Because on this side of eternity, there's nothing permanent that God tells us, I'm going to promise you, you're going to have this, and this is what you're going to have for the rest of your life. We're not promised that. We're not promised an easy life on this side. Not including Abraham, who was in older age and told, hey, God didn't say, you know what, I'm going to make this easy for you because you're an older person. I'm going to take it easy. The trip might be a little bit more luxurious. No, it was a lot different during that time. And I can promise you right now, no matter how old you get, as long as you're on this side, you'll still be used by God. You still have an opportunity to serve God. In Matthew 6:21, I want us to go there really quick. Matthew 6:21. He says here, and I'm going to actually start in verse number 19. I'm going to start in verse number 19. Matthew 6:19. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. In this verse, in these three verses right here that I'm reading from, I really like the fact that Christ is telling you not only the fact that you lay your treasures upon here and you're going to see them be corrupted and you're going to see them rust, but the fact that I think that's really telling us that don't get too comfortable trying to store everything you have here on earth, thinking that it's going to last here. Thinking that everything that you possess here on this side of eternity is what's permanently for you for the rest of your remaining life, including leading into eternity. Because Christ tells us that if you lay your treasures here on this side, what you really value, if you lay it here on this side of eternity, it's going to rust. It's going to be corrupt. After so much time, the things that I possess, whatever I have in my possession, I already know the longer I have it, the more it gets worn out. The more I use it, the more it gets worn out. The more I even try to store it away. I have a lot of things that I put into boxes thinking that's going to stay safe. Only when you open it, you're like, well, that's getting ugly real fast. How I put that away? But it's true. I mean, you store these things away and guess what? I mean, they go bad. They get corrupt. I mean, that's just the way it goes. That's just what happens here on this side. Because I think God is really trying to show us that if you value things here on this side, you're going to see them go away like this. Because nothing on this side is permanent. And I think that includes the calling that we get here in knowing the fact that we can't stay permanently in the spot that we're in. We can't stay as Christians right here in this exact spot and not expect to grow. We want to grow. We should be looking to grow. We should be looking to move and be more and more and more for God. If we're trying to stay permanently in our spot, God's either going to leave you alone and he's going to tell you, well, that person's not working for me anymore, or he's going to really want to push you and challenge you and say, hey, come on, I really, really want you. And chances are he needs you. He wants to use you. He wants you to go and live for him. He wants to use you. He wants you to grow in him. He wants to get closer to you. He wants you to build that relationship with him. That's what he calls us to be for him. We need to push ourselves more and more to realize that there's nothing here on this side that's permanent, only temporary. Everything on this side is temporary. And I really think that's a mentality that we need to get ourselves into at times. Because when you get into a very permanent type of mindset instead of a temporary type of mindset, you start to get caught up in thinking that you're stuck here on this side, that this is all you have left for you here. I know people that are like that, that think that everything that they store up, money that they store up, possessions that they want to keep, things that they really try to put themselves in order for, I'm thinking to myself, all the effort you're putting into those things, one day, I'm sorry, it's not going to be here one day. Once you're gone, once those things get corrupt, you can't replace them anymore. You can't fix them anymore. Let's look at 1 Timothy 6:7 really quick. 1 Timothy 6 in verse number 7. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we carry nothing out. I'm going to read that one more time. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we carry nothing out. I really think that hits the nail right on the coffin right there for us in realizing that everything on this side is temporary. We brought nothing into this world. We're going to take nothing out of it. If you want to be a stranger that increases their faith, if you want to be a stranger that's able to live for God, you have to realize that whatever you do on this side is not going to be permanent. It's going to be temporary. Whatever you're possessing here on this side, it's only temporary. Where you really put your faith in, what you really put your treasures in, where your heart's at, if it's for God, you're going to see that reflect in the blessings that you get. If you're not in this effort for God, if you're not living for Christ, you're going to see those things fade away really, really fast. And my last point for tonight, to be a stranger is to be rewarded. To be a stranger is to be rewarded. Verse number 10 real quick in Hebrews chapter 11. Let's go back there really quick as we begin to start ready to wrap up. Hebrews 11, in verse number 10, it tells us, "For he looked for a city which hath foundation, whose builder and is God." I really like that verse, the way he ends Abraham's story right here for just a moment. And when he says by faith, in this point right here, he tells us in verse number 10, "For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God." Through verses 8, 9, and 10, it tells us that Abraham was called out to go. Abraham realized the places that he was going to be staying in, the land that he got, was going to be a land that although he possessed and God gave him and that God blessed him with and the generations to come, he would not build a single house in this land. He had to live out of tents because he realized the city that he was looking for all along, the city that God had promised him, would be a city in heaven, would be a house in heaven, would be a home that he could call home in heaven. And I like the way they put the city with foundations whose creator and maker are God. Abraham realized he needed to be a stranger on this side of eternity so that one day he could see his permanent home in heaven. He needed to be uncomfortable. He needed to realize that it's not permanent on this side. He needed to realize he needed to rely on God to take him through this journey, all to realize that when he got uncomfortable on this side to move, he could have that permanent home one day in heaven. And I believe this is the reward of the stranger. To see that if I'm living for God, if I'm okay with being uncomfortable at times, if I'm okay with not having permanent lifestyles on this side of eternity, I'll see my reward one day in heaven. I'll be able to say that I saw exactly what God had promised me throughout my life. And there are many times where when you're living for God on this side, when you're living for Him, when you're pushing to strive to be a better Christian every single day and you're working to live for Christ, you're going to see blessings come out. But let's not forget the ultimate goal that we're looking for, the ultimate reward that God has promised us is the home that we have in heaven that does not go corrupt, that does not rust away. Through everything God has called you to, remember that through the uncharted path, through the lonely times, through the uncomfortable trials or challenges and the temporary lifestyles, one day your faith will be rewarded by God. And as we begin to wrap up, I really want to challenge us tonight to see that type of lifestyle that we can live. Be a stranger. That sounds completely weird. That sounds completely different. But I really promise you it's something that God has shown us in Hebrews chapter 11, that when you have faith to be a stranger, when you have faith to realize you're not alone, you're not lost on this journey, you're not by yourselves. When you get into the most uncomfortable situation in the sense of, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know what I'm doing, God has called me here, I'm not too sure what my purpose is in this moment, but I'm going to trust that He's going to lead me there. I want you guys to see that through everything there, you're going to find your reward one day, and you're going to see blessing after blessing come into your life. As the disciples had asked in Luke, Lord, increase our faith. As we move more and more into this part of Scripture that I'm talking about, this series that we're looking at, faith to be a stranger, means that I want you all to challenge yourselves to find a way to say, I want to move out of my comfort zone and to move into something completely different at times. God will not always put you in the most uncomfortable positions. He's not going to always call you to go out there and be the most uncomfortable, in situations time after time. But realize when that calling is coming, when you feel that tugging, when you feel the Holy Spirit calling you and telling you, hey, come on, let's do this. Don't ignore it. Don't suppress it. But be ready to take on that challenge to be a stranger. So for tonight, as we begin to close, as we begin to bow our heads and pray, I really want to pray that we would be strangers in this lifetime, that we'd be strangers as Abraham, who knew the fact that if he could be a stranger here, he could have his home one day in heaven, a permanent home, and be a permanent resident in God's kingdom. Let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, I want to thank you for this Wednesday night once again, Lord. And I want to pray, Lord, that everyone here would take on this challenge to be a stranger. To be able to say that we know that this side of eternity, this side of earth is not our home, Lord, but that we're just passing through. But along the way that we can live for you, that we can call on you, that we can seek you, that we can find you, that we can know you, Lord. And that everything that we do on this side would be an honor and a blessing to you, dear Lord. That everything we strive to be here on this side, whatever job we're going into, whatever calling we're looking for, whether it's into the mission field or whether it's into an everyday 9-to-5 or whether it's into the education system, whatever we may be going into, Lord, whatever we may be doing, I just pray that we be a stranger on this side so that one day we can find our permanent home with you in heaven one day. That, Lord, one day we would take on this challenge right now and say, I want to do everything I can to live for you here on this side so that one day, Lord, I can see you in glory and hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. Lord, help us to be a stranger on this side of eternity. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.